Well, hello, I'm Andrew Whitehead, and I'm head of the energy team at Shakespeare Martineau, and this is the latest in a series of bite-sized videos on the Energy White Paper, when we're talking to key stakeholders in the energy industry about the Energy White Paper and what it means for them. And I'm delighted to be talking today to Craig Dyke, who's the head of strategy and regulation at National Grid System Operator. And it's Craig's job to help set the strategic direction for the ESO, the Electricity System Operator, part of National Grid, not just in terms of business models and policy and regulatory frameworks, but overseeing the ESO's relationships with its industry stakeholders, including, of course, Ofgem. So, Craig, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for inviting me.
We've worked together for many years, haven't we? And in the early days, it doesn't feel as if, I don't remember life being as complicated as it is now. But perhaps to set the scene, before we talk about the sort of vision for the future, I just wonder whether, well, clearly we're still in lockdown, as is apparent from the wallpaper behind me. What sort of challenges has that been presenting for the ESO?
I guess for us as the ESO, we had the same challenges as most of the businesses, adapting to working from home and trying to work out how we can make technology work so we can still have those good collaborative conversations across teams. From a system operator perspective, and we saw this trend of this early on in lockdown where industry closed down, commercial businesses closed down, and people started working from home. So you could see a sudden drop off in demand over the period of time, certainly as we went into the Easter period and then through the summer. And we were seeing demand drop off in the order of like 15 to 20%, which on the face of it, that may sound like a great thing, because clearly lower demand, less generation system could drive down costs. The reality is, from a system operator perspective, it makes life much more difficult, because what it actually does, it takes us from that large spinning plant off the system and leaves you with a load of renewable generation and low carbon generation. So the way we were having the challenges through the summer was all about putting the right mechanics and the right technology on the system to ensure that we could actually manage those low demand periods. So we took a step back and tried to understand what it is we actually need. So we looked at the services we had today, and clearly they were fit for purpose of a lot of what we needed. But we also recognized that we needed to get some clarification on how we could use services that had sat in the grid code for a long time. Hence, put an emergency code change in place, which allowed us to actually have those conversations with distribution network owners. We both had clarity on how we would enact some of those services embedded in those codes. We also put in a service in a very short space of time called ODFM, and that was all about accessing that embedded generation, which you haven't got access to through the market. We get a route to it through the service. So solar panels, for example, wind farms that we wouldn't normally have access to. And in parallel with that as well, recently moving into the autumn, we then launched dynamic containment. So dynamic containment is all about getting really fast acting generation into the market and storage, so you can arrest some of those frequency falls. So as that demand changes, you've actually got that right generation, those right technologies there to actually help you cope with some of those sudden changes in demand.
So it sounds like when you're talking about transforming the energy system, agility and being able to react quickly and having all the right tools in the toolbox are pretty critical, aren't they, for the ESO?
Yeah, I mean, flexibility and the speed of response from market has always been really important to us, but it's becoming more and more important now. A lot of that is driven by the fact that the whole dynamic of the demand is changing as well. So where and how we all use electricity at home or in business, that's changing as well. So you've got a change in demand profile, overridden by a change in supply profile as well. So the supply is generally driven by not just by the market, but by the weather conditions as well. So you've got two variables now, as opposed to in the past, it would have been one variable, which would have been just demand.
Yeah, so looking at change then in the Energy White Paper in particular, things aren't going to settle down, are they? Things are going to get, I guess, a little bit more challenging or a little bit more exciting. There's lots of stuff in there. I mean, there's also a lot of stuff still to come. So there's lots of detail still missing. What are the particular bits that you think from the ESO perspective are going to be particularly interesting to see in the coming months?
I mean, the points have kept several key areas for us. I mean, stepping back and thinking of what the overall purpose of Energy White Paper is all about, setting that pathway to hit net zero by 2050. One of the key bits, which I know we've featured in our future energy scenarios for a number of years now, but it's all looking at driving energy efficiency. So driving those energy efficiency in the homes, in vehicles, in businesses, and therefore that whole heat and building strategy, which government would put in place, is really key. You start with energy efficiency, and then you can overlay some of the more sort of, I guess, decarbonizing heat, for example. And decarbonizing heat is a key thing. It's been talked about for a number of years. Some of our analysis, which has been backed up by the CCC, looks at actually removing gas boilers from, certainly new gas boilers from the home by 2035. Now that's only 14 years away, which if you're putting a boiler in today, a gas boiler, that could be the last gas boiler you ever install. And that's a significant shift. So we have to have that right framework in place. The cost technology is higher for decarbonized heat. Therefore, how do you get those market signals in place to drive down those actual costs over time? So that whole heat and building strategy of government is really, really key to making sure you make best use of energy efficiency that allows you to introduce more decarbonisation of heat, for example. The other key areas as well, which again resonated with our key messages from our scenarios, were around the role of hydrogen as well, and having a real clear hydrogen strategy that sets out what its role is, what a market potentially could look like, and also where you might actually want to site some of that hydrogen as well. So hydrogen is talked about for using heating in the homes. It's also talked about as a storage vehicle for the electricity side. So that's great. So therefore it's got multi-functions, in which case it needs some overall strategy that allows you to site it in the right place geographically, but also site at the right time as well. So actually you get benefit from geography, but also get benefit from that moment in time. And then you've also got a key bit for us as well is around data and digitalization. Now, these are two words which are bandied about quite a lot, but the more we look at it, there's so much data out there that probably isn't used as effectively as it could be. Therefore, it's about making it really clear how that data can be used by consumers, by business, so they can make more informed choices of where to invest in heating or electric vehicles or when they use energy, which then should, in theory, put us on a much better pathway to net zeros. Ultimately, it's all about the consumer, therefore giving the consumer choice, not forcing choice on the consumer.
No, there's some three really big topics there, aren't there? Can you just help us give us a bit of scale to the heat challenge? Because as I understand it, I'm not very technically minded, but when you're talking about heat pumps, these are electrical devices, aren't they? So they're going to contribute to the increased electrification. So if every new home had an electric heat pump and we started to retrofit these into existing homes, what sort of extra stress is that putting on the system in terms of demand?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And that's where you need to step back, go back to the energy efficiency point, where the more you can make homes and buildings more energy efficient, then actually you're in a place where you use a heat pump, you can use a heat pump at any time of the day, but actually you retain that heat in the home much longer. Whereas if you roll down to a less efficient house today, then clearly you're going to lose it. Therefore, you're always going to put that heat pump on when you actually need it. It's then tying in heat pumps, not just heat pumps, but also the electric vehicles as well, tying into smart technologies. And these are technologies that actually exist today. So that ability for you to charge your electric vehicle or put your heat pump on, or even your dishwasher or washing machine, when the price is right for you, that exists today. So therefore it's rolling that out on a larger scale, working with the suppliers to make sure that actually the consumer gets their heat, charges their car when they want to, but also at the right price for them. So I guess there's an economic benefit to the consumer as well. And then for us as the ESO, so what does that mean for us? It means you end up with a flattening of that peak. So as well as sort of you've got the peaks of supply and demand, the demand peaks, you should actually be able to flatten or move that demand across, in which case that should obviate the need for more network reinforcements.
Okay, and what about hydrogen then? I mean, how much of hydrogen is feasible, do you think? Do you think there's some technical challenges that need to be overcome? I mean, and hydrogen production in a sort of low carbon way, is that going to be a challenge? There's not an awful lot said about that in the Energy White Paper, as far as I can see.
No, and I think that's where, if I look at BEIS, I know BEIS have set out some key funding around innovation, in particular around storage, which hydrogen falls in part of that. And I think it's understanding as well as the technology to make it work. Because I think a lot of what you see read out, the technology is actually quite well established. It's the actual cost, and how you actually drive the cost down to convert energy into hydrogen, and then from hydrogen either back into electricity form or use it for transportation of gas, for example. So that whole innovation piece, which BEIS is setting out as part of the Energy White Paper, is really key. So we all understand more about how and when and where we can actually use hydrogen. Okay,
so it sounds as though there's certainly from the consumer perspective in the home, there's a role that demand can play in terms of helping drive energy efficiency, but presumably also in providing extra tools for the ESO toolbox, whether that's heating, but maybe more particularly vehicle to grid when you're looking at electric vehicles. So what's this sort of ESO view on that?
Yeah, I mean, as you'll be aware, Andy, I mean, we've looked at demand side markets for the last 10 or 15 years, and we've looked at trying to develop demand side into existing markets, and we had to tweak our terms and conditions so that actually demand side through aggregation, so aggregate little loads can actually come and participate in the markets. And that's great where you've got big chunky loads just stitch them all together. But when you get down to that consumer level, it's much more granular. The big challenge then is around how do you encourage consumers to want to participate in the market when ultimately, me as a consumer, I just want to charge my vehicle when I want to, and I want to do it at the cheapest or the best price for me. If it adds some other benefit, that's great. But I think some of the questions we're asking ourselves around consumers is, how much knowledge do we expect consumers to have, or do we wish them to have? And therefore, how can you make it as simple as possible for consumers? And that's the big thing for us, because there's loads of opportunity in there. But do you provide that opportunity with a direct relationship with the consumer, or do you do it through some other means, whether it's through a third party or through aggregation, for example?
Yeah. Okay, I'm sticking with consumers then. So is all of this change and transition going to be more cost for consumers? Is that inevitable, do we think?
It depends how you look at it. I guess what's the counterfactual, isn't it? So it's all about driving towards net zero for 2050, but it's doing it at the most economic route. So part of what we're doing today, so one of our ambitions is about being able to operate the system carbon free by 2025. And that's all about showing when that market presents that zero carbon position, which will inevitably be every day of the week, I guess, when you get to 2050, this is showing we've got the right tools in place well ahead of that, so we can manage that. And that in itself will open up possibilities for demand side, which ultimately we will see a lowering in costs to ultimately for balancing the system, which clearly will then be passed on to consumers.
Yeah, okay. Fine. Well, it would be rude not to mention the B word, wouldn't it? Brexit. So in all of this, looking at these challenges in the Energy White Paper, does the ESO think Brexit's a help, a hindrance? Is it neutral?
At the minute, it feels neutral. There's a lot of work going on between ourselves, BEIS, and with the Commission as well, trying to understand what a single European market means for GB if we're outside of the European Commission. I guess what we see today, there's a TSO cooperation piece being put in place, and that in theory, I guess what we have seen since Brexit, since we've left the Commission, is actually it has meant limited impact on system operability and limited impact on interconnected flows. And interconnectors are the big thing, aren't they? So, and that's where you end up with this one big system across Europe. So where there's excess renewables in Norway, then the rest of Europe shares and vice versa. And that's what it's all about. So I think for Brexit, there should be minimal impact, but I guess until that TSO cooperation document lands, it's unclear. We need more information on that at the moment.
Yeah, it doesn't look as if the prospect of Brexit has sort of inhibited people thinking about building new interconnectors. I mean, clearly, if the wind's blowing in one part of Europe and not in the other, there needs to be the ability to shift the power around, doesn't it? That just seems to be obvious for everyone's benefit. Okay, one final question I had then on the Energy White Paper, Craig, with relation to the role of National Grid as the system operator, because that's mentioned to a relatively high level, I think, in passing in the Energy White Paper. But since then, Ofgem's come off the fence a little bit, I think, and indicated where it sees the direction of travel in terms of an independent system operator. What's the National Grid view on that?
So I guess where we are from regards what's been set out, certainly with the Ofgem system operator view, which gives a little bit more granularity and detail. So we're going to continue to work with BEIS and Ofgem to understand more about what's their thinking behind some of the roles they believe the ESO could undertake. I think there's some resonance in it as well. So some of the work we're doing today on early competition, for example, which is about driving more competition in the build of networks, some of that resonates with why we see that going already. So there's some good sort of correlation there. I guess it's still a conversation to be had. Certainly when BEIS launched their consultation, which I believe comes out in the spring, that will set out, I guess, more where BEIS expect parties and third parties to actually operate within this space. And that's all about understanding not just the role of the ESO, the role of the system operator as a whole, but also the role of Ofgem and BEIS themselves are part of this. So we're going to continue to work with government and BEIS as they sort of develop their thinking in this area. Okay, great. Well, I think we're out of time. Thank you very much, Craig. We really appreciate you taking time out of a busy day job. We'll let you get back to it. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Cool. Thanks, Andrew.